March 31st, 1991. Naval Air Station Norfolk, Virginia. The air inside the massive military hangar was thick with anticipation and patriotic pride. 22,000 people, most of them in uniform, filled every available space in what would become one of the most historic concerts ever broadcast on American television. Whitney Houston stood center stage in a white sequin gown that caught every spotlight, her voice soaring through greatest love of all, with the kind of power that had made her the biggest star on the planet. This wasn't just another concert. This was the Welcome Home Heroes special, broadcast live on HBO to over 50 million households across America. Whitney was singing for troops returning from the Gulf War, for their families, for military brass, and for a nation desperate to celebrate victory and unity after months of tension and fear. Everything was perfect. Whitney's vocals were flawless, her band was tight, and the audience was completely captivated. She had already brought the house down with electrifying performances of I Want to Dance with Somebody and I'm Your Baby Tonight. The camera crews were capturing every moment for posterity, and Whitney's team backstage was already celebrating what they knew would be a career-defining performance. But then, during the bridge of greatest love of all, something happened that would change everything. Whitney was singing the line about learning to love yourself when her eyes caught movement in the third row. A young sailor, barely visible among the sea of uniforms, was standing on his seat holding up a handmade banner. The hangar's lighting made it difficult to read at first, but as Whitney continued singing, her eyes focused on the words scrawled across the white fabric in bold black letters. Her voice faltered, just for a second, but enough that her bandleader glanced over concerned. Whitney's hand went to her heart, and those watching closely could see her eyes welling with tears. The banner read, "Your voice saved me from suicide. I'm gay, and your music made me feel loved." The moment everything changed. The year 1991 was not a time when such declarations were made publicly, especially not in a room full of 22,000 military personnel. This was an era when "don't ask, don't tell" was about to become official military policy, codifying the persecution of LGBTQ service members into law. This was a time when coming out could cost you your career, your family, and in many cases, your life. And here was a young sailor, standing in front of his peers, his commanding officers, and millions of television viewers, holding up a sign that revealed his most dangerous secret. Whitney stopped singing completely. The band, uncertain what to do, continued playing the instrumental track, but without Whitney's voice, the music felt hollow and strange. The entire hangar fell into confused silence as people tried to understand what was happening. Security immediately began moving toward the sailor with the banner, ready to remove him from the venue and quite possibly from the military itself. What Whitney Houston did next defied every rule of live television, every piece of advice from her management team, and every expectation of what a pop star was supposed to do in 1991 when faced with the reality of LGBTQ existence. She held up her hand, stopping security in their tracks. Then she walked to the edge of the stage, pointed directly at the young sailor, and said in her microphone in a voice that carried to every corner of that massive hangar and into 50 million American homes, "What's your name, honey?" The sailor, visibly shaking, lowered the banner slightly. "Daniel," he called back, his voice cracking with fear and emotion. "Daniel Reeves, ma'am." Whitney nodded slowly, her eyes never leaving his face. "Daniel Reeves," she repeated, making sure every person in that hangar heard his name. "How old are you?" 22, ma'am," Daniel replied, and you could hear in his voice that he was expecting to be thrown out, arrested, dishonorably discharged, or worse. 22 years old, Whitney said softly, but her microphone picked up every word. "And you've been carrying a burden that heavy for how long?" Daniel's face crumpled. "Since I was 12, ma'am." The hangar was so silent you could hear the hum of the television cameras. 22,000 people held their collective breath as they watched one of the world's biggest stars have an unscripted, deeply personal conversation with a gay sailor who had just publicly come out in the most dangerous possible environment. Whitney turned to face the full audience then, her white gown shimmering under the stage lights. When she spoke, Her voice was steady but filled with an emotion that went far deeper than any song she'd ever performed. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "I need to tell you all something, and I need you to really hear me." Her management team backstage was in complete panic. This wasn't in the script. This wasn't planned. This could destroy her career, cost her endorsement deals, turn her conservative Christian fan base against her. But Whitney Houston, standing on that stage in her moment of greatest visibility, made a choice that would define who she really was beyond the carefully crafted image. "Daniel just told all of us something that took more courage than I can even imagine," Whitney continued. "He told us he's gay. And in this room, in this moment, that might be the bravest thing anyone has done all day." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some began to whisper to their neighbors. But Whitney wasn't finished. "Daniel said my music saved his life," she went on, her voice growing stronger. "He said my music made him feel loved. And I want to tell Daniel and everyone else in this room and everyone watching at home something that I believe with my whole heart." She paused, letting the weight of the moment settle over the crowd. Love is love. God's love doesn't have conditions. God's love doesn't come with a list of who deserves it and who doesn't. God's love is for everyone. Every single person in this room. Every person watching at home. Every person who's been told they're not worthy of love because of who they are or who they love. The weight of silence. What Whitney Houston didn't say in that moment, what she couldn't say, was that she was speaking from a place of deep personal understanding. Years later, the world would learn about Robyn Crawford, Whitney's childhood friend and former lover. But in 1991, that truth was locked away, hidden behind a marriage to Bobby Brown and a carefully maintained public image. Whitney knew exactly what Daniel Reeves was feeling because she had felt it herself. She knew the terror of hiding who you really were. She knew the pain of loving someone but being told that love was wrong, sinful, impossible. She knew what it was like to hear whispers and speculation, to have people question your sexuality, to feel like you were living a lie every single day. Her own mother, Sissy Houston, had made it clear that a relationship between two women was not natural. The music industry had made it equally clear that Whitney's crossover appeal to white, conservative America depended on her maintaining a wholesome, heterosexual image. Whitney had been forced to choose between her authentic self and her career, and like so many talented LGBTQ artists before and after her, she had chosen the career. But the cost of that choice was visible to anyone who looked closely enough. The cost was in the exhaustion in her eyes, the way she seemed to be performing even when she wasn't on stage, the growing reliance on substances that helped numb the pain of living inauthentically. Standing there in that military hangar, looking at Daniel Reeves holding his banner with trembling hands, Whitney saw herself. She saw the young girl who had fallen in love with Robyn Crawford and been told that love was wrong. She saw every LGBTQ person who had ever found solace in her music because it spoke to the universal human need to be seen, to be loved, to be accepted exactly as you are. The greatest love of all wasn't just a song about self-esteem. For Whitney's LGBTQ fans, it was an anthem about surviving in a world that told you daily that who you were wasn't good enough. When Whitney sang, "Learning to love yourself is the greatest love of all," millions of closeted people heard permission to love themselves even when their families, their churches, their communities, and their governments told them they were wrong, broken, sinful. "Daniel," Whitney said, turning back to the young sailor, "I want you to come up here with me." The gasps that rippled through the hangar were audible even on the television broadcast. Security looked to Whitney's tour manager for guidance, but he could only shake his head in disbelief. This was completely unprecedented. "Come on up here, baby," Whitney encouraged, extending her hand toward Daniel, even though he was too far away to reach it. "I want everyone to see you. I want everyone to see your courage." Daniel hesitated, looking around at his fellow service members, at his commanding officers, at the television cameras. This was career suicide. This was the end of everything he'd worked for. But Whitney's eyes held his, and in them he saw something he'd never seen before: complete acceptance. "No judgment. No disgust. Just love. Daniel Reeves, 22 years old, climbed over seats and made his way to the stage. Security parted to let him through, not because they wanted to, but because Whitney Houston had made it clear that anyone who tried to stop him would have to go through her first. The embrace that changed history. When Daniel Reeves reached the stage, Whitney Houston did something that would be replayed on news broadcasts, analyzed by cultural critics, and remembered as one of the most powerful moments in LGBTQ history. She embraced him, not a brief, performative hug for the cameras, a real embrace. She wrapped her arms around this trembling young sailor and held him while he sobbed against her shoulder. The white sequins on her gown were soon wet with his tears, and her own tears were streaming down her face, ruining her carefully applied makeup. 22,000 people watched in stunned silence as one of the world's biggest stars held a gay sailor and whispered to him. Words the microphone didn't pick up, but that Daniel would later share in interviews. I see you. I know you. You are not alone. When they finally separated, Whitney kept one arm around Daniel's shoulders and turned to face the audience again. The television cameras captured every moment, and in 50 million American homes, families were having conversations they'd never had before. Some were angry. Some were changing the channel. But some, particularly young people struggling with their own sexuality, were seeing something they'd never seen before. Acceptance from a mainstream, beloved celebrity at a time when such acceptance could cost everything. I want to sing the rest of this song for Daniel, Whitney announced, and for everyone like him who's been told they're not worthy of love. Because that's a lie. The greatest lie ever told. What happened next would be studied in music conservatories and LGBTQ history courses for decades to come. Whitney Houston, with her arms still around Daniel Reeves, sang the final verse and chorus of Greatest Love of All directly to him. But this time, the song was transformed. Every word took on new meaning. When she sang about the children being the future, she was singing about LGBTQ youth who were contemplating suicide because they saw no future for themselves. When she sang about teaching them well and letting them lead the way, she was singing about the importance of affirming young people's identities rather than trying to force them into heteronormative boxes. And when she reached the climactic line about learning to love yourself being the greatest love of all, her voice cracked with emotion because she was singing about something she herself was still struggling to do. The military audience didn't know how to respond. This wasn't what they'd come to see. Many of them had been taught, both in their faith communities and in their military training, that homosexuality was wrong, sinful, a sign of weakness. But watching Whitney Houston, this powerful, talented, beloved woman, embrace and affirm a gay sailor with such obvious genuine love, something shifted in that hangar. Not everyone, not even most people, but enough that when Whitney finished the song and Daniel Reeves turned to walk back to his seat, expecting to be escorted out by military police, something remarkable happened instead. One person in the audience stood and began to clap, then another, then a section. Within moments, nearly half the hangar was on their feet applauding, not just for Whitney's performance, but for Daniel's courage and for the moment of radical acceptance they'd just witnessed. The aftermath of truth. Backstage after the concert, Whitney's team was in complete chaos. Her publicist was fielding furious calls from conservative organizations threatening boycotts. Her management team was trying to craft statements that could minimize the damage. Her record label executives were calculating the potential financial losses from alienated fans. But Whitney Houston sat in her dressing room, still in her sequin gown, still wearing Daniel Reeves' tears on her shoulder, and she was calmer than she'd been in years. That's the realest I've been on stage in my entire career, she told her longtime friend and assistant. That's the only moment that mattered. The fallout from the Welcome Home Heroes concert was immediate and severe. Conservative Christian radio stations that had championed Whitney's music began pulling her songs from rotation. Several corporate sponsors quietly ended their endorsement deals. Whitney received death threats in the mail, including letters from people claiming to be military members who felt she disrespected their service by supporting a gay sailor. But something else happened too, something that Whitney's critics hadn't anticipated. Letters began pouring in from LGBTQ people around the world, thanking her for what she'd done. Young people who had been planning their suicides wrote to say that seeing Whitney embrace Daniel Reeves had given them hope that maybe, someday, they could be accepted too. Parents of LGBTQ children wrote to say that watching that moment had helped them understand their own children's struggles and inspired them to offer love instead of rejection. Within weeks, LGBTQ organizations were asking Whitney to appear at Pride events and AIDS fundraisers. The community that had always loved her music was now embracing her as one of their own, even though she never explicitly came out. Whitney's response to these invitations surprised even her own team. In June of 1999, 8 years after the Naval Air Station concert, Whitney made a surprise appearance at the 13th annual New York City Lesbian and Gay Pride Dance. When asked by an MTV reporter why she decided to attend, Whitney's response was simple and powerful. "We're all God's children, honey." The truth behind the truth. Daniel Reeves didn't know when he made that banner and brought it to the Welcome Home Heroes concert that he was carrying a message that resonated so deeply with Whitney's own hidden truth. He didn't know about Robyn Crawford, about the relationship Whitney had ended when her career began taking off because her mother and her management team made it clear that being openly queer would destroy everything she'd worked for. He didn't know that when Whitney sang "Greatest Love of All," she was often fighting back tears because she was singing about something she hadn't been able to give herself: unconditional self-acceptance. Robyn Crawford would later write in her memoir that Whitney had come to her house in 1980, shortly after signing her first major record deal, handed her a Bible, and told her they had to stop their physical relationship because it would make our journey even more difficult. Whitney had said, tears streaming down her face, if they found out, they'd use it against us. For over a decade, Whitney had lived with that choice, watching as Robyn remained by her side as her assistant, her creative director, her closest friend, but no longer her lover. The pain of that sacrifice was etched into every love song Whitney sang, every ballad about impossible love and heartbreak. When Daniel Reeves held up that banner, saying Whitney's music had saved him from suicide, he was unknowingly describing what Whitney's music represented for so many LGBTQ people. It was coded truth. It was emotion that couldn't be expressed any other way. It was a lifeline for people drowning in a heteronormative world that had no space for their authentic selves. Whitney's decision to embrace Daniel publicly, to affirm him in front of 22,000 people and millions more watching on television, was as close as she would ever come to publicly acknowledging the truth about her own sexuality during her lifetime. It was an act of courage wrapped in plausible deniability. She was supporting a fan, being compassionate, showing Christian love. But to those who understood, to the LGBTQ community who had always known Whitney was one of them, even if she never said the words, it was a moment of truth. The 1991 Welcome Home Heroes concert became a turning point in Whitney's relationship with her LGBTQ fans. Before that moment, she had been a beloved diva whose music resonated with the community. After that moment, she became an icon, a symbol of what was possible when someone chose love over fear, even at great personal and professional cost. Daniel Reeves would later say in interviews that the moment Whitney embraced him on that stage saved his life in ways that went far beyond preventing his suicide. It gave him the courage to live authentically, even as he faced discharge from the military under Don't Ask, Don't Tell policies. It connected him to a community of LGBTQ veterans who supported each other through the dark years before the policy was finally repealed. And it showed him that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is tell your truth, even when everything in the world tells you to stay silent. The price of authenticity. But for Whitney, the price of that moment of authenticity continued to compound over the years. The conservative backlash from the Naval Air Station concert was just the beginning. Throughout the 1990s, as rumors about her sexuality persisted and as her marriage to Bobby Brown became increasingly troubled, Whitney faced a level of scrutiny and speculation that took a devastating toll. Every interview included questions about Robyn Crawford. Every profile mentioned the rumors. Every public appearance with Bobby was analyzed for signs that the marriage was real or just for show. The media's obsession with Whitney's sexuality, combined with her family's religious condemnation of homosexuality and the music industry's fear that confirming the rumors would destroy her crossover appeal, created an impossible situation. Whitney couldn't live authentically without losing her career, but she couldn't continue living inauthentically without losing herself. The substances that would eventually contribute to her death in 2012 started as a way to manage this impossible tension. Cocaine, pills, alcohol, they all served the same purpose: to numb the pain of living a lie, to quiet the voice inside that said she was betraying herself every day she stayed in the closet, to make bearable the constant performance of being someone she wasn't. Whitney's brother Gary would later speak about how the family's rejection of Whitney's relationship with Robyn contributed to her downward spiral. When Robyn finally left Whitney's employment in 2000, after 2 decades of devoted service and love, something in Whitney broke. She had sacrificed her authentic love for her career, and now she was losing both. The final years of Whitney's life were marked by increasingly erratic behavior, failed comeback attempts, and heartbreaking public performances where her once magnificent voice was ravaged by years of substance abuse. But even in her darkest moments, Whitney never forgot the LGBTQ community that had embraced her. She continued to speak out in support of LGBTQ rights in interviews, even as she deflected questions about her own sexuality. In a 2000 interview with Out magazine, Whitney made her position clear: "I don't care who you sleep with. If I'm your friend, I'm your friend. I have friends who are in the community." When the interviewer pressed about rumors that she was lesbian, Whitney's response was telling: "I love everybody." It was as close as she would ever come to a public acknowledgement, and for many LGBTQ fans, it was enough. When Whitney Houston died on February 11th, 2012, found in a bathtub at the Beverly Hilton Hotel, the LGBTQ community mourned one of their own. Pride events around the world held moments of silence. Gay clubs played her music and remembered the joy her songs had brought to countless dance floors. And Daniel Reeves, now in his 40s and living openly as a gay man, released a statement remembering the moment 21 years earlier when Whitney Houston had chosen his truth over her own safety. The legacy of a moment. "Whitney Houston taught me that visibility matters," Daniel wrote. "She taught me that sometimes the most important thing you can do is acknowledge someone's humanity in a world that wants to deny it. She risked everything that night in Norfolk to tell me and millions of other LGBTQ people that we were worthy of love. I've spent my life trying to honor that gift." The impact of that 1991 concert moment extended far beyond Daniel Reeves, or even the LGBTQ community. It became a case study in how public figures can use their platforms for good, even at great personal cost. It demonstrated that authentic moments of human connection will always resonate more powerfully than perfectly scripted performances. And it showed that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is tell someone else that their truth is valid, even when you're not ready to claim your own. In the years since Whitney's death, as more details about her relationship with Robyn Crawford have emerged through Robyn's memoir and various documentaries, the Naval Air Station concert moment has been re-examined through a new lens. What seemed at the time like an act of allyship now appears as something deeper, a moment when Whitney came as close as she ever could to living her truth publicly. She couldn't say, "I'm like you" to Daniel Reeves, but she could say, "I see you, I love you, you matter." And in 1991, in that context, with everything she had to lose, that was revolutionary. Today, the banner that Daniel Reeves held up that night is part of the LGBTQ History Museum collection. The words, "Your voice saved me from suicide. I'm gay and your music made me feel loved," are displayed alongside artifacts from other pivotal moments in queer history. Museum guides tell visitors about what happened when Whitney saw those words, about the embrace, about the moment when 22,000 people had to confront their own prejudices and choose whether to applaud or condemn. Lessons from a legacy. The story of Whitney Houston and Daniel Reeves reminds us that coming out is not a single moment, but a continuous choice, made harder by fame, family expectations, religious conditioning, and systemic oppression. It reminds us that the people who seem to have everything, the ones whose voices can fill stadiums and whose talent seems limitless, are often carrying burdens we can't see. It reminds us that the cost of hiding who you are is devastatingly high, and that sometimes the substances people use to cope with that cost end up costing them everything. But it also reminds us of the transformative power of acceptance, of being seen and loved for exactly who you are. Daniel Reeves held up a banner saying Whitney's music had saved him from suicide. 21 years later, at her memorial service, he would stand and say that Whitney's embrace had given him a life worth living. He had gone on to become an advocate for LGBTQ veterans, had married his partner, had built a life of authenticity and purpose. The moment Whitney chose to see him, truly see him, had rippled out into decades of impact. And perhaps that's the final, most important lesson from that night in Norfolk. We never know whose life we might save by choosing visibility over safety, authenticity over approval, love over fear. Whitney Houston's career did take a hit after that concert. She lost endorsement deals, radio airplay, some portion of her fan base. But she gained something more valuable. She lived one moment of her life completely authentically, where her actions matched her values, where she chose love over fear. For a woman who spent so much of her life hiding her truth, that one moment of radical honesty might have been the most important performance of her career. Daniel Reeves still has the banner he held up that night. It's faded now, the black letters not as bold as they once were. But he keeps it as a reminder of what's possible when someone chooses courage over comfort. And every year on March 31st, the anniversary of the Welcome Home Heroes concert, he posts a photo of the banner on social media with a simple message. Whitney saw me. Whitney loved me. Whitney changed my life. Thank you, beautiful soul. We're all God's children. The story of that night in Norfolk is ultimately about the power of human connection to transcend fear, prejudice, and the carefully constructed walls we build to protect ourselves. Whitney Houston, standing on that stage in her white sequin gown, saw a young man holding his truth out for the world to see, and she made a choice. She chose him. She chose love. She chose authenticity over safety. And in that moment, she gave not just Daniel Reeves, but millions of LGBTQ people around the world permission to believe that maybe someday they could be loved exactly as they were. That's Whitney Houston's real legacy. Not the record sales, or the awards, or the iconic performances, although those matter too. Her real legacy is in the lives she touched by choosing, even for just one moment, to live her truth publicly. To say with her actions what she could never say with her words. I see you. I know you. You're not alone. We're all God's children, honey. Every single one of us.